All righty then. So I guess it's June the what, 17th, Monday. We're about 10 minutes late. It's 1:10 p.m. and that's because Teddy had computer problems. Anyway, McKenna and I were just shooting the breeze for a while, and now I think we should probably begin. I said last week at the end of our Zoom session, I said we'd finish the middle ear stuff and then we'd go on to inner ear. So that's what I'll do. I'll share screen here, and we'll go to the notes of last week, and I'll pull those guys up here. And we're almost done. We went through otitis media last week, and we went through treatment for otitis media last week. Hang on, oh, that stupid thing pops up all the time. I wish it would not do that. There you go. And we're working our way down the page. Audiometry and otitis media, as you can see here. And then we covered tympanometry a little bit, your type A, your type C, your type B tympanograms. And we also looked at type AS and AD tympanograms. AS tympanograms that come along with otosclerosis, and type AD tympanograms that can occur with disarticulated ossicles. So as we keep moving down the page, we looked at cholesteatoma last week. We talked a very bit about Bell's palsy, and I said I don't really know why that's even in here. And then we finished last week talking about otosclerosis, and I talked really a lot about bone conduction testing, about the 3 contributions to bone conduction testing, and these are listed right here. This is important to know regarding otosclerosis, because otosclerosis presents with what is called Carhart's notch. And if you're looking at Carhart's notch in audiometry, you will see it depicted much like, well, if I can find out how to even, this is a very different application I'm using here. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty here negotiating my way through to find the PowerPoint, because I'm not really even using PowerPoint. I'm using something else here. I've had computer problems, so you're going to have to bear with me, a bit of difficulty here. But here we go. We're getting toward it, because it's a different application than typical PowerPoint. Here's your types of tympanograms, okay, that we covered last week. Just looking at them, you've taken some of this in audiometry, but it's very, very important in hearing disorders to be able to tie together audiometric findings with the disorder. So otitis media, we said last week, begins with a type C tympanogram, because that's early stages of otitis media, and then it evolves to a type B tympanogram when you've got fluid and pus behind the eardrum, and now you have no peak on the tympanogram. And to anyone vague on this, please review your previous Zoom session last week where we talked about how tympanometry is done. And I would imagine that was somewhat covered also in your audiometry course 130. But as we're moving toward otosclerosis, here's disarticulated ossicles, what we looked at last week even. And there you're going to be associated with a type AD tympanogram. I really wish I knew how to make this PowerPoint. Oh, it was so bad that I hadn't had the computer problems I've been having, but because this is not my regular PowerPoints. There you go. There's Carhart's notch. Here's otosclerosis and Carhart's notch. A drop in bone conduction testing, or a drop in bone conduction hearing sensitivity at 2,000 hertz. And the reason that it happens at 2,000 hertz is precisely because of what's written here on the bottom of page, whatever this is, 3. Okay? When you're testing by bone conduction, 3 things contribute to the way we test by bone conduction. And when I stop sharing here for a second, 3 things going on. You put an oscillator on the mastoid bone, you're testing by bone conduction. Yup. And you're wiggling the fluids in the cochlea. That's distortional bone conduction. That's the big contribution to bone, okay? A second one, there's 2 more. The second contribution is inertial. And that means that the ossicles are not fused to the skull, they're hanging by ligaments. So when you're vibrating the skull, the three middle ear bones are kind of moving a little bit behind the vibration of the skull because they're not stuck on the skull. They're stuck together with ligaments, but they're not fused to the skull like a doorknob is to a door. Okay? And the third contribution is osteotympanic, meaning there's a little air column moving back and forth when you're vibrating the mastoid bone. Those three things together contribute to the way we hear by bone conduction. With otosclerosis, the bones are now fused to the skull. Okay, the pathology of otosclerosis has frozen the three middle ear ossicles and stuck them to the skull. They're now, when you're vibrating the skull with the bone oscillator, there is no inertial movement, no lag. The three little bones are not lagging behind and pushing in and out of the oval window anymore. Nor is the little column of air pushing back and forth going to help because those bones are fused, they're stuck. So that column of air can, whatever, go, it's nothing happening, okay? So you've only got distortional. You've lost the two. So now you've only got distortional. And where is the loss of those two going to be found the most? Precisely at the resonance of the middle ear ossicles, which is 2000 hertz. All right. So there we go. I'll share screen once again, and we'll move through to complete this unit. Audiometry and otosclerosis. There it is, Carhart's notch. Put a star by that. It's a fixation of the ossicular chain. It changes its inertia. You've lost that inertial contribution. You've lost the osteotympanic contribution, and it makes bone conduction look worse than it is. The resonance of the middle ear ossicles might also change due to new growth of spongy bone, but here it is in italics. Carhart's notch, the drop in bone conduction, does not indicate a sensory neural loss. It's an artifact of the way we test bone conduction together with the unique pathology of otosclerosis. The type of tympanogram will be a type AS, a stiff tympanogram. And at the end of your notes, here it says acoustic reflexes. What the Sam Hill are acoustic reflexes? Let's make sure we look at that, just a trifle. That we can see, here's a picture out of another textbook of otosclerosis. You can see the drop in bone conduction. There's funny looking symbols that Martin uses, but nonetheless, you can see the same thing there as I was showing you here. Okay, so we'll just kind of carry on. A tympanogram with very small static compliance. That's with otosclerosis, because otosclerosis is a stiffening of the ossicular chain. And last week we showed you the procedures by which they do a stapedectomy. And they're shown here. Because I cannot move through this PowerPoint the same way I normally do, I have a little sometimes problem seeing all the different slides like I like to show, but such is life when you've got computer problems. Okay, so this is also in your PowerPoint slide. This is meant to go along with your notes. Otosclerosis knocks out those two contributions. Now here, see again, problems with the PowerPoint. I can't, these things here are showing up white against the back end of this, which is what a drag. Okay. Here's a whole bunch of audiograms. Let's look at this. So here you go. There's nothing wrong with doing this. Here we go. What kind of audiogram do you think this would be? When you're looking at this, and you're looking at this audiogram, you can see that the person can't hear until about 50 decibels, 40 or 50, and that's through air conduction, through a headphone. And yet by bone conduction, the person hears normally, because you've bypassed the outer ear, you've bypassed the middle ear, and you're hearing like a baby. So this is what they call an air-bone gap. And look at where the thresholds increase. They get a little bit better. And what frequency? 2000 hertz. You can put that together with otitis media. This is a young kid. He's got an ear infection in both ears, otitis media. He's going to have elevated levels at just barely hearing speech, SRT. He's going to have elevated most comfortable listening levels because he's got a plug in his ear. And what's the plug in his ears? Pus. And he's going to have wonderful speech discrimination, SD, because if you talk louder, he's going to hear everything. And tympanometry. Look at tympanometry where I'm circling here. What type of tympanogram do you think he's going to have? And if you say a type C or type B, you're correct. He won't have a type A, and he won't have a type AS. It'll be a type B or a type C, depending on how advanced his otitis media is. Here's otosclerosis. I call the person, hey, ya, how are you? Otosclerosis. Okay, there's Carhart's notch. And instead of an improvement in air conduction thresholds at 2,000 hertz, you have a drop in bone conduction at 2,000 hertz. So when you're comparing this to this, these are the two most common middle ear pathologies. Now you're looking at a mixed hearing loss. Look what I called this guy. Oh, not him again. Oh, not him again. All right? So, oh, not him again. He's got a hearing drop in his right ear. And look at his left ear, the X's. They're even worse. But look at the bone conduction. For both ears, right and left, normal. Or they're as good as the right ear. So when you're looking at this audiogram, you'd say, oh, his left ear is worse than his right ear, but by bone conduction, he's hearing the same in both ears. And you can see this now. Let me explain the symbols to make sure we're keeping the symbols correct. This less than sign, less than, represents the left ear by bone conduction. The brackets on the right represent the right ear by bone conduction because they used masking. Okay, they kept the good ear busy while testing the bad ear. That's all that means. So you've got bone conduction for both ears is like the right ear by air conduction. Now, McKenna, does this make any sense to you, and is what I'm talking about right here?
A little bit.
Good. Okay, that's all right. So the right ear has a sloping hearing loss, and the left ear by bone conduction hears just like the right ear by bone conduction. So this less than sign means that the oscillator was put behind the right ear, because that's what is happening when I'm facing you. Okay? And the left ear has the bracket because you kept the good ear busy while you were testing it. Nonetheless, bone conduction is the same as the right ear by air conduction. The left ear has an air-bone gap. So the left ear must have something wrong with it. Probably otitis media. Maybe this is an old person who's got an ear infection in his left ear. Could be. All right, tympanometry is going to be abnormal. It's going to be type C or type B. So just looking at all of this stuff. Here's another person, and both ears hear this, around 30 to 40. You can see that where you're following my arrow. And the right ear and left ear are hearing by air conduction around 50 to 60. So this person must have an ear infection in both ears. And look at the bone conduction. The person cannot hear until around 30 or 40 decibels, even when you bypass the outer ear. And this brings us to the next unit, Unit 3, because now we're going to be talking about inner ear disorders. But look closely at this slide. We're keeping it here. Look closely at the slide and look at the way the person hears. Follow my cursor here. This is as good as the guy's hearing gets. Even when you bypass the ear by putting the bone oscillator on the mastoid bone, the person hears around 30 to 40 decibels it takes to hear. So that must mean he's got an inner ear hearing problem for both ears. And then when you're putting sound through a headphone, it's even worse. So this is what you call a mixed hearing loss. The person has hearing loss partly due to inner ear pathology and partly due to middle ear pathology. A mixed hearing loss. You call this an air bone gap, right where I'm circling here. The difference between the way he hears by bone and the way he hears by air conduction is called an air bone gap. And that always indicates conductive hearing loss, and that always indicates outer and middle ear pathology. But the person also has inner ear pathology, because when you avoid the outer and middle ear, still hearing by bone conduction shows around a 30 to 40 decibel hearing loss. All right. Now, the rest of this stuff we won't really go much into. I'm going to leave this stuff alone here, and we'll just kind of leave it. Just don't worry so much about these slides. We're at the very end of the PowerPoint stuff. I think this is for more advanced audiometry, which we're not there yet. So I'm going to just kind of leave this alone. Let's move on to talk about inner ear pathology. Here we go. And you can see this now in your notes, inner ear pathology. And we'll sort of talk about this and move into this. We'll spend a couple of weeks on this, of course. We certainly won't be getting through this today. We can rest assured about that. Okay, so let's look at this here. Audiometry, inner ear disorders. Here we go. Inner ear disorders cause sensory neural hearing loss, by far the most common source of hearing loss. So read that sentence carefully and put a star by it. 95% of hearing loss is inner ear hearing loss. Only 5% of hearing disorders are outer and middle ear disorders. Yet we spent 2 weeks on it, okay, because they occur, and they occur with otitis media, mostly in children, all right? But here now we're getting to the clients that you will mostly be seeing as an HIS. As a hearing instrument specialist, over 90% of your clients are going to be people with inner ear disorders. So here we go. By the way, I'll stop sharing for a second and just give a real heads up here. What's the name of the most common hearing disorder in the world? It's called presbycusis. Presbycusis sounds a lot like Presbyterian, like Presbyterian church, okay? Presbyterian means, by the way, I'm a preacher's kid, so I know this. Presbyterian means church of the elders, as opposed to the bishops, okay? Presbyopia, I've got presbyopia. I can't see close up. To read a book close up, I've got to wear reading glasses. Presbyopia. Hits you when you're 40. When you're 40, you're going to start having difficulty reading stuff that's about a foot away or less. Nothing wrong with it. That's why so many people like me wear reading glasses. It works like a charm. Perfect. Presbycusis is hearing loss in the elderly. So presbyopia is vision loss in the elderly. So presby must mean elderly, and it does in Greek. Presby means elder. So presbycusis is hearing loss in the elderly. And how do elderly people hear? They have trouble hearing treble. They can't hear treble. Now, as opposed, now think carefully to the audiograms I was showing you. What did otosclerosis have? Pretty flat hearing loss. What did otitis media have? Pretty flat hearing loss. The X's and O's were pretty flat, because conductive hearing loss is putting a plug in your ear. And if I put a plug in your ear, you're going to have problems hearing all the pitches, not just some. Presbycusis means you'll hear bass really well. You'll hear men talking better than women. You'll hear boom, 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 much better than you will hear. So elderly people have trouble hearing the birds. They can't hear crickets. Okay? They can hear frogs, ribbit, ribbit, but they can't hear the crickets. And in speech, they can't hear s, sh, t. They can't hear the consonants because those are high-pitched. So they have trouble hearing treble. And what is the problem? Hair cell damage. Hair cell damage in the cochlea is the most common cause of hearing loss, and they call it sensorineural. Sensory, S-E-N-S-O-R-Y dash neural, N-E-U-R-A-L. Sensorineural hearing loss is 95% of hearing loss. What causes it? Damage to the inner and outer hair cells of the cochlea. And what's the most common type of sensorineural loss? Presbycusis. What's the second most common cause of sensorineural hearing loss? Noise-induced hearing loss. Now, though you can't do much about aging, actually aging makes someone better. It's like wine. Old wine tastes better. Elderly are wiser. Okay, so people improve with age. Never think you go down. You're actually getting better. I'm about 106, you know. Normal, it's normal. Anyway, when does presbycusis hit? Usually when you're about 65. When you become a senior citizen, you start having problems hearing what someone said. You have no problems hearing that people are talking. You just can't tell what they said. Did they say dishes or fishes? Did they say kittens or mittens? Because what makes those words different is the high-pitched consonants. So again, like you heard in acoustics, the differences between fat, bat, sat, hat, cat, they all have but is a low-pitched sound. And you put your hand to your throat, you feel it vibrate, but you don't feel this vibrate when you say those are lip sounds. That's presbycusis. Trouble hearing treble. Same with noise-induced hearing loss. People target shooting, excessive iPod noise. If you can hear someone's headphones and you're not listening to the headphones, that person's going to have noise-induced hearing loss. They're going to get presbycusis ahead of their time. And we're going to look at what the audiogram looks like with presbycusis. And what does the audiogram look like with noise-induced hearing loss? Because just like otitis media and just like otosclerosis, you can tell the pathology by looking at the audiogram. You know, I know exactly what disorder that is. That's why audiometry is such an important part of a course in hearing disorders. And that's why I keep talking about the audiogram. Because as a clinician, when you're testing someone's hearing, your mind's going to be going click, 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 click. Oh yeah, I'll bet you this is otosclerosis. Or I'll bet you, yep, this guy's got noise-induced hearing loss. And you're going to be able to figure it out, not just by the person telling you, but by the shape of the audiogram. So without any further ado, why don't we share screen and take a look at some of this. All right, here we go. Let's read our notes. Now, do you have this pulled up? This is inner ear disorders. It's a different unit. So I'm going to save today's Zoom session in Unit 2 in your Canvas. But anyway, inner ear disorders cause sensorineural loss, by far the most common cause of hearing disorders. Now, put a star by sensory and put a star by neural. Sensory refers to outer hair cells, which amplify and sharpen the traveling wave for soft input sounds. Damage to the outer hair cells. Remember what you had in 120 anatomy. Remember what the outer hair cells do compared to the inner hair cells. The outer hair cells, we said last semester, they sharpen and they amplify the peak of the traveling wave. They sharpen and they amplify the peaks of the traveling waves. So damage to outer hair cells results in a mild to moderate hearing loss. You'll have normal tympanograms, all right, because there's nothing wrong with the middle ear. And do you recall, I'm going to stop sharing here. Do you recall acoustic reflexes? Acoustic reflexes are also done with tympanometry. The probe is stuck in the ear, but instead of changing air pressure and measuring the amount of sound bouncing off the drum as you're changing air pressure, now the probe is stuck in your ear and they're presenting a loud sound to the ear. And did that cause the middle ear muscles to contract? Did that cause the stapedius muscle and the tensor tympani muscle to contract? And if they contracted, that's an acoustic reflex. Now remember, with tympanometry, there's always that low-pitched tone coming out of the probe. And as you're changing air pressure, did you change the amount of that low-pitched tone that's bouncing back? And when you change the amount of sound bouncing back, that's the tip of the tympanogram. All right, acoustic reflexes, you still have that low-pitched tone bouncing off the drum, but now you're introducing a second sound, a loud tone, and is it changing the amount of the low-pitched tone that's bouncing off the drum? The tone is constantly ongoing, and now you're adding a beep. Did that make more of the low-pitched tone bounce back? Why would more bounce back? Because you had an acoustic reflex that tightened the eardrum. And when you tighten the eardrum, it made it more stiff, less compliant. More of the sound bounced back. Acoustic reflexes are a part of tympanometry. And acoustic reflexes normally occur for sounds that are about 85 to 110 dBHL. Make sure you remember that. A normal hearing person has acoustic reflexes that will occur with sounds that are about 85 to 110 dBHL. 90, 95, yep, you'll have acoustic reflexes. Do you know why we have acoustic reflexes? They make the sound of your own voice softer. Because how loud is average conversational speech? Around 65 dBSPL, remember from acoustics. How loud is average conversational speech in dBHL on the audiogram? Around 50 to 60. All right, so if that's the case, that's how loud average conversational speech is. But how loud do we hear our own voices? Not other people standing a foot away from us, but how loud do we hear ourselves talking? Well, I hear myself through the air because the sound coming out of my mouth is going in my ears. But the second way I hear myself is through the bone. So when I'm talking, I'm hearing myself by air conduction and bone conduction. So I'm hearing myself at around 85 plus. And that's going to cause an acoustic reflex. So the reason you've got acoustic reflexes is to make the sound of your own voice softer when you are talking. Weird, huh? But so now that we have that, remember the pieces and parts of audiometry. Pure tone air conduction, pure tone bone conduction, that's part one. Now we move to part two, speech audiometry. Speech reception threshold testing, most comfortable level testing, speech discrimination testing, and uncomfortable loudness level testing. Those are the four subsets of speech testing. That's part two. And part three is tympanometry. And what are the parts of tympanometry? The type of tympanogram, is it an A, a B, a C, or whatever? Static compliance, what's the height of the tympanogram? And acoustic reflexes. Okay, and acoustic reflexes are part of tympanometry, but instead of using air pressure to change the amount of sound bouncing off the drum, they're using a loud sound to cause an acoustic reflex, which changes the amount of the sound bouncing off the drum. All right, there's our little mini review. Back to our notes. Read along with me. Okay, so sensory loss is the most common. Mrs. Jones, who walks into your office, right there. She's 72, has problems hearing her grandkids, blah, 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 blah. You as a clinician will do the hearing test, and you'll know that the person will probably have a mild to moderate sensory neural loss, not a severe, because what do outer hair cells do? They help the inner hair cells pick up sounds below 50 or 60. So if I ripped out all of your outer hair cells, you'd have about a 50 to 60 decibel hearing loss, because outer hair cells help you hear sounds below 50 or 60. So without them, you can hear 60, 70, 80, but you can't hear 10 and 20. Okay? So you'll have a normal tympanograms because there's nothing wrong with the middle ears. You'll have acoustic reflexes, but they will be at reduced sensation levels. Now let's make sure we remember what sensation level is. Stop sharing. Remember sensation level. What is it? It's the softest it took for you to hear a tone, but it's compared to your thresholds. Let's say you can't hear 1,000 hertz until it's 50 dB on the audiogram. And I present to you a 60 decibel tone. It's at 1,000 hertz, but I present it at 60. How loud did you hear it? At 10 dB sensation level, because you can't hear until 50. So if I'm presenting a 60 dB tone, you're hearing it at a 10 dB sensation level. Let's pick another example. If I have perfectly normal hearing and can hear all the way down to 0, and I present a tone at 100 dB, I hear that tone at 100 dB sensation level. Okay? Because I can hear down to 0, and you're presenting to me a tone of 100 decibels. But let's say I can't hear until 50, and you present a 100 dB tone. Now I'm hearing it at 50 dB sensation level, because 100 is only 50 higher than 50. Okay? So remember what that concept is, because in audiometry, we report acoustic reflexes according to sensation level. So a person with a 50 decibel sensory neural loss will probably have acoustic reflexes, albeit they will be at reduced sensation levels, because you're always matching the intensity level to the person's hearing threshold for that tone. So if I can't hear 1,000 hertz tone until 50 dB HL, and you present to me a 1,000 hertz tone at 100 dB HL, and I have an acoustic reflex that kicks in, that acoustic reflex is occurring at 50 dB sensation level to me. So acoustic reflexes are presented in terms of intensity in dBHL from 85, 90, 95, 100, 105 to 110. And you're using that intensity range to find out if the person has an acoustic reflex or not. Now mark this down. Remember, conductive hearing loss obliterates acoustic reflexes. A middle ear pathology will put an X, because if I've got negative air pressure, or if I've got pus behind my ear, or if I've got otosclerosis, I probably will not have acoustic reflexes. Acoustic reflexes are that tightening of the bones. But if I've got a middle ear pathology, the acoustic reflex is going to screw that all up. If my middle ear is filled with pus, I'm not going to have an acoustic reflex. Sensory neural loss probably should still have an acoustic reflex, okay? But it will occur at reduced sensation levels. Now remember this too from acoustics. We're tying a bunch of things together here. What is hearing loss? The floor is elevated, but the ceiling usually is not. Now conductive loss isn't like that. So make sure you look at this. Pretend you look at this hand here is the softest you can hear. This is the loudest you can tolerate. If I put a plug in your ear, all of that's going up, right? You're not going to be able to hear soft sounds, and you're also going to be able to tolerate loud sounds. All right, because I got a plug in your ear. You're going to mow outside and mow the lawn. You're going to put earplugs in. It means your friend is going to have to scream for you to hear the person, but it also means you can tolerate the loud lawnmower. Okay, now think of sensory neural. Opposite. Not that at all. Here's sensory neural. The floor went up, the ceiling didn't. 100 decibels sounds kind of loud to someone with normal hearing. Guess what? 100 decibels also sounds loud to someone with sensory neural loss. So if you walk up to someone who's hard of hearing and yell in his ear, he's probably going to wind up and punch you in the side of the head, okay? Because it's going to hurt that person just like normal hearing. So remember, conductive hearing loss is like an elevator box. Everything went up together. The floor and the ceiling went up together. Sensory neural is this. The floor went up, but the ceiling of loudness tolerance did not. And when you think of deafness, if you ever seen people using sign language, they're deaf. Those people too, if you put 100 dB into their ear, it'll hurt. The trouble is, they can't hear anything. And once they can, it hurts. Their floor has met their ceiling. They can't hear 70, can't hear 80, 90, 100, 110, 120 hertz. So they've got no hearing, and as soon as they sense anything, it hurts. They are deaf. That's what deafness is. Okay? So really keep these concepts very, because they make or break an understanding of hearing disorders. Conductive loss is like a plug in the ear. Sensory neural loss is not, repeat, not like a plug in the ear. Loud sounds bug them just like they would bug a normal hearing person. It's just that their floor has gone up, but their ceiling of loudness tolerance has not. And this is true for presbycusis, it's true for noise-induced loss, it's due for all inner ear pathology. Let's now go back and look at our notes here. Share screen. See where we've got. Here we are. Now, neural. Look where I'm highlighting here. See, the word sensory neural has two words. SN, sensory and neural. And we often tie them together. But they are different. Neural refers to inner hair cell damage and the eighth nerve. Remember that the inner hair cells send all sound info to the brain, and without them, you're deaf. Okay? The inner hair cells send all info to the brain. The outers just help the inners pick up sounds below 50 to 60. So the outer hair cells, remember, are efferent. They take information from the brain. They are the ones that stretch and shrink constantly, and they amplify the traveling waves, and they sharpen them. But the inner hair cells send all info to the brain. So with the inner hair cells have one particular flaw. They cannot pick up sounds below 50 to 60. They need the outer hair cells to help them do that. So, buttons and become a tailor. All right, here, neural refers to inner hair cells and the eighth nerve, and damage to them results in a severe sensory neural loss and poor speech discrimination. In other words, if you're talking to that person at his or her most comfortable loudness level, let's say they find a certain level that's, okay, yep, that sounds perfect. If I was listening to a radio like that, that's where I'd turn my radio. That's my most comfortable loudness level. Remember, that's one of the parts of speech testing. You want to find out what's the most comfortable loudness level. So you're going to find the person's most comfortable loudness level, and then you're going to play speech words to them, to the person. And the words are going to be those single syllable words. Now, did you guys learn that in audiometry, the kind of different kinds of words that are used? So when you're using SRT, you're using those two-syllable spondee words: hardware, cupcake, armchair, woodwork, ice cream, blah, blah. When you're using speech discrimination, they're single syllable words. Say the word cow. Say the word nose. Say the word wall. Okay, you're just covering. And so that's speech recognition. And in neural hearing loss, they will have a hard time hearing what you said, even if it's comfortably loud. Because the inner hair cells send info to the brain, but now they're sending a garbled message to the brain because they themselves are damaged. So unlike sensory neural loss, which is mild to moderate, neural loss is usually more severe, and it comes along with worse speech recognition. Speech discrimination is affected. The tympanograms will be normal, type A, but the acoustic reflexes will be absent. Because they now, remember, outers tend to die before inners. Outer hair cells tend to die, and then inner hairs begin to die. It isn't always neat and cut like that. Outers tend to die and inners tend to follow, but it isn't always like that. If you take two people, and this is good stuff to cover as we begin this unit, okay? Take two people. They both have presbycusis, and they both have the same amount of presbycusis. Let's say they both have a mild to moderate degree of presbycusis. Pretend the thresholds are identical between the two people. One person might have 80% speech discrimination. The other person might have 60% speech discrimination. How come the difference? Que pasa? What's up? Probably the person with the 80% speech discrimination has damage only to his or her outer hair cells, and the inners are fine. The person with the poorer speech discrimination may have an even Steven amount of inner and outer hair cell damage. And that's what's giving rise to his hearing thresholds. So that person was going to have poor word recognition or speech discrimination, even though the words are presented at his or her most comfortable loudness. The acoustic reflexes will be absent. All right, they will likely be absent. And the tympanograms will likely be normal. So if we take a look at sharing our screen here, we'll share screen and we'll go to this one PowerPoint. Oh, let's go to outer and middle here. And I believe that was the last slide. I'm going to try and see if I can go up a slide or now down. See what we've got. See what we can do here. Okay, I got to go up a slide. Yep, this is because I've got that my things got screwed up. My PowerPoint is messed up a little bit. I've got some homework to do after we're done this session here, but at least we were able to get it going. Just want to find this one slide here for you because I think it's kind of a cool one. It's come on. I sure wish I had my regular PowerPoint. It works so much better. Let's see, acoustic reflexes. I want to find it. I think there we go. There's the slide. There's the slide. Okay, McKenna's just patiently waiting through. At least I've got some company. I mean, otherwise I'm just talking into a blank computer. So at least there's another face there, which is always great. Really glad you showed up. Anyhow, look at this. This is an important one to keep from your Unit 1, from your outer ear pathology and middle ear 1. But you can also put this one, think about this as being part of Unit 2 as well. What you're looking at is degree of hearing loss. Okay? And now look at percent of absent acoustic reflexes. Now look at conductive. See this word here? And notice how that line goes up. This means if you have a conductive hearing loss of about this amount where I'm circling, you're going to have absent acoustic reflexes. You'll have a 100% chance, percent of absent reflexes. So the conductive hearing loss doesn't have to be very much in degree to obliterate conductive acoustic reflexes. But sensory neural, look at the bottom here where it says cochlear. That's what they mean by sensory neural. If you have once you get past 60, once you get past the outer hair cell range, once you get past 60, you round a corner. And now you're into neural hearing loss. And when you've got inner hair cell pathology, you dramatically have more absent acoustic reflexes. Have a look at that. So sensory neural loss should likely still have acoustic reflexes. They'll still have them until you get to have around a 60 decibel hearing loss. When you get past that, you know, K-N-O-W, you know there has to be inner hair cell damage because outer hair cell pathology can only cause up to about a 50 to 60 decibel sensory neural loss. Inner hair cell pathology usually follows and is more associated with a more severe hearing loss and absent acoustic reflexes, but normal type A tympanograms. All right, just keep the stuff together. All right, go back to our notes, and we can kind of wind down toward the finish of today's particular session. But let's kind of take a look at this. Okay, I don't want that. I want the notes. Here we go. Share. There you go. Here we go. In general, these form the two clinical populations, sensory neural hearing loss. One with mild to moderate, the other with more severe. Mild to moderate sensory neural loss, I've got it grayed out here, is by far the most common population of sensory neural loss. Look what else it says here. Harder to please with hearing aids because they can hear without the hearing aids. Think about it. Okay? Severe sensory neural loss is a less common population. They cannot hear without their hearing aids. So they're much easier to please. Look at this right here and put a star by that puppy too, because and now I'll stop sharing and talk in plain English. You got Mrs. Jones. She's got a mild to moderate sensory hearing loss. Common as the day is long. In your office, she hasn't bought hearing aids yet, has she? She's come to your office because her family says she's got trouble hearing. So she's there at your office. You're talking to her. Is she going to hear you? Sure. She can hear without her hearing aids. She just has difficulty hearing, but she can still hear you. As long as you're talking loud enough and slow enough, and as long as she can see your face, probably one-on-one, no real problem. Hey, guess what? Those are the hardest people to fit with hearing aids. They're the most common population, but you know why they're so hard to fit with hearing aids? Because they can still hear without their hearing aids. A chain is as strong as its weakest link. They have problems hearing in noise, but they don't have any problem hearing one-on-one. No problem. So to them, the cup is always half empty. They're the hardest to please. And they're the ones that you've got to explain things, and you know your grandkids are having problems hearing you, or you're having problems hearing your grandkids. So don't you want to have a better quality of life? All of the stuff you've got to kind of convince them to buy hearing aids. But now here comes Mr. Smith. And Mr. Smith has a severe hearing loss. He can't hear until the tones are 80 decibels. What did we say average conversational speech is in dBHL? 50 to 60. So guess what? When you're talking, so without the hearing aids, can't hear you. So to him, the glass is half full. He's come to buy hearing aids. He has to. There is link to life. Without the hearing aids, he's screwed. That's why I want to draw the two populations in sensory neural loss. Really, when it comes to the degree, there's mild to moderate. It's usually associated with outer hair cell damage. And then there's severe. And severe is associated with outer/inner hair cell damage. Poor speech recognition, even though the speech is at a most comfortable loudness level, they're the easiest ones to please with hearing aids. They'll be most picky, though, about the sound of the hearing aid. They're going to want the hearing aid to sound like their old one. Sometimes they're going to be doing things like, with the new hearing aids, like, oh, you're going to be going, what's the matter? Are you having a seizure? They'll be going, with the fingertips, they'll be making weird little. That's because they want the new hearing aids to sound like the old ones, because that was their link to life and communication. And if they're getting new hearing aids, by gum, they better sound like the old ones, otherwise. And that's why you learned about, and you will learn again, about ANSI testing. That's why you're going to learn about real ear measurement, because you're going to be able to objectively find out what the hearing aid's doing in an ear. So instead of having to sit there going, oh, how does that sound? Oh, how does that sound? Oh, how does that sound? You'll measure what the old hearing aids are actually doing, and then you can take the new hearing aids and make them do the same thing. And you'll have it on paper, all right, or on your screen. So That's why you're going to be learning real ear measurement next year. And that's also why in real ear measurement, I'm going to cover ANSI testing again. So you really have it in there. Have you guys taken ANSI testing? McKenna, have you taken that or not?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. Haven't then. You'll probably, but yeah, you probably have you taken 140? What do they call a hearing aids introduction to hearing aids yet? I think you're.
I believe so. I think it wasn't it? It was just this previous spring.
What was that? Say that again.
I think we took it this spring.
Okay, the spring.
I believe so. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm a real believer in repetition. So if I have to guess if someone's taken something before or not, by gum, they're going to get it again. That way, it's like when you watch a movie twice, you get more out of it. So we're good. This is good. We're nearing the end of our session today. I'm going to just talk about what we will do more next week, okay? So next week we're going to dive into, I stuck really to this top paragraph here today, talking about sensory neural hearing loss in general. But next week when we convene, what we're going to do is we're going to slide on down and we'll look at a little bit of stuff about chromosomes and genes, but we're not going to spend much time on that. We're going to talk about mothers who have German measles. During pregnancy, the baby may be born with hearing loss. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about a disease called cytomegalovirus. It's a herpes virus that's mild on the person who has it, but the developing baby has a 30% chance of sensory neural loss. Hereditary hearing loss, we'll talk about Mondini syndrome. And Mondini syndrome, look what it says here. The cochlea doesn't have all 2.5 turns. We'll talk about perinatal causes, which means difficulty during birth. Maybe the umbilical cord is wrapped around the baby and the baby can't get enough oxygen. When you lose oxygen, the first sense to go bad is hearing. Okay, not vision, but it's usually hearing because the cochleas take a lot of oxygen, the hair cells. Then we'll look at postnatal causes, and that you can have meningitis can cause sensory neural loss. We'll scroll on down here. Measles can cause sensory neural loss. The mumps can cause sensory neural loss. And then you have something called labyrinthitis. Maybe you've got a cochlea infection. Maybe you've had a viral infection of the cochlea. That can cause sensory neural loss. Then maybe you're taking pills that are good to fight your infection of some type, but they are ototoxic. Look what I've grayed out there. Ototoxicity. Oto, ear, toxic, poison. There are various drugs that have been used as antibiotics that may cure the disease, but they kill off hearing at the same time. We'll talk a little bit about those. We'll even mention aspirin. Aspirin doesn't cause hearing loss, but it causes tinnitus or ringing in the ear. So when you're doing a case history on Mrs. Jones and she talks to you about ringing in her ears, you may end up asking her, do you take arthritis medication? Do you take blood thinners to prevent a stroke? Those are usually aspirin, and aspirin is a blood thinner. And elderly are often advised to take aspirin every day to help increase or make the blood thinner to prevent a stroke and also to get rid of the pain of arthritis. But at the same time, it might cause ringing in the ears, tinnitus. So then we're going to get to the big one, and we'll cover presbycusis. We'll talk about the types of presbycusis. And there's 4 classic types of presbycusis. We've introduced ourselves to it today, but we'll look at it more in the next couple of weeks. And we'll look at the differences between men and women regarding presbycusis. Then we'll look at noise-induced hearing loss, and we'll cover how noise-induced hearing loss gets measured. And we'll talk about the type of hearing loss. In other words, what frequencies are most affected by noise-induced hearing loss. Noise-induced hearing loss looks a little bit different from presbycusis. You can tell a presbycusis audiogram, and you can tell a noise-induced hearing loss audiogram. They have, in quotes, earmarks. They literally have, they leave indications. And we'll talk a bit about noise-induced hearing loss. That's the second most common cause of sensory neural loss. And the sad thing about it is it's preventable. You can't prevent age, but you can certainly prevent noise loss. So there's a lot of macho guys driving in their cars with a blah, 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 and they'll be clients. They'll be in your office because people seem to think nobody stares into the sun. Of course not. You're going to burn out your eyes. But people seem to think that the ear is impervious to the ravages of noise, and they're nuts. Your ears are meant to hear soft voices over the crackling of a fire. We were never meant to hear the clang of steel on steel. Okay, so noise-induced hearing loss is the second most common cause of hearing loss in the world. Then we'll look at sudden idiopathic deafness. What happens when someone all of a sudden goes deaf in one ear for no good reason? All of a sudden they've lost their hearing in one ear. You know what the treatment for that usually is? Steroids, right away. Then you might get some of the hearing back. You don't know. And we'll look at Meniere's disease. Meniere's disease, thank God, isn't so terribly common. But Meniere's disease is brutal. It's too much endolymph in the scala media of the cochlea. Too much fluid surrounding the hair cells. So now the cochlea, the membranous labyrinth of the cochlea, is bulging. That is going to cause horrible, horrible dizziness. The person's going to be having rotary vertigo and puking his guts out. And it hits in episodes. Like a seizure, the person can tell by an aura, I'm going to have another attack. And that causes low frequency sensory neural loss, which is unusual because most sensory neural loss is trouble hearing treble. Noise-induced, trouble hearing treble. Presbycusis, same thing, but not Meniere's. It's trouble hearing bass. We'll talk about why. And now then we'll talk a little bit about otoacoustic emissions. We'll talk a little bit about head trauma, cochlear dead regions. We'll discuss a few things here to finish off and also vestibular disorders, balance disorders. Not much, just a little bit, because the HIS isn't working with vestibular disorders. Anyway, I will stop sharing. I will thank McKenna for attending, and I can now upload this as a YouTube video, and I'll put it in Unit 2 in 125, okay?
Sounds
All right.
good.
Any
All right.
questions?
I had a question on the bass thing. My brother actually is one of those macho kids.
Oh, boy.
And he always asks me, he's like, does this affect my hair cells? Because he's like, it's mainly bass, but I never know how to answer it because...
If the noise is loud, it doesn't matter what frequency the noise is, okay? It's coming through your ear canal. And remember what your ear canal has a resonance? Remember the outer ear canal resonance? Well, where's the outer ear canal resonance? Between 1,000 and 4,000 hertz? And guess what? That's exactly where noise-induced hearing loss is going to be filtered through the outer ear canal resonance, and it's going to kill off those hair cells. Permanent.
Wow.
So if he's got ringing in his ears after his noise exposure, that's nature's warning. That's like, It's just like when you walk over the grass, the blades will stand up again. But if you keep walking over the grass, the blades die. And that's how I think about hair cells. You can expose them and blow them over, and that's why your ears will be ringing the next morning, because your hair cells are telling your brain you're hearing a sound, but you're not. But then the tinnitus will go away because your hair cells will stand back up again. But if you keep repeating noise exposure, you're going to kill off your hair cells.
Wow.
Now you've got old age hearing loss before your time.
That's crazy. I'll have him listen to this.
Yeah. Okay, I will stop recording here and I'll upload this, and it should be available on Canvas later on today. All right?
All right. Thank
Okay,
you so
cheers.
much.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.